couple housekeeping things. If you can keep yourselves muted and your video off, that will make it easier to view the presentation. There is a chat feature on the bottom. And as we're going, feel free to, if you have any questions or comments, please use that chat feature as we go. We're going to be breaking about 20 minutes into the presentation to take some questions. So feel free to kind of enter those questions as you have them, or if you'd like during the question section, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions that you may have. Then we're going to kind of roll into the second half of the presentation, and then we will have an opportunity at the end as well to go over any questions or comments that folks may have. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of move into a quick introduction for those of you who don't know who the Conservation District is and kind of what we do. But Clallam Conservation District is a local entity. Every county has a conservation district, and we all kind of do unique things, but the one kind of common theme is that we work with landowners to help with conservation issues. We're directed by a 5-member volunteer board, 3 of which are elected and 2 are appointed. All of our services are free of charge, and we work with folks on a voluntary basis. And we've got a lot of really cool information on our website. So we just encourage you all to check out our website. We'll be going over a few resources kind of throughout the presentation, and most of that information is available on our website. We will also be recording this webinar, and then we'll make it available to all of you and folks who were unable to attend afterwards. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of roll into the actual presentation. And if you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to use that chat function, and we will try to help you the best we can as we're going. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get going on the presentation. Great. We're going to cover are the definition of native plants, how you can boost them onto your farm, how to plant them, what sorts of plants you should look at installing, where you can get the native plants. Megan's going to talk a bit more about tips and techniques for properly planting the plants to give them the best chance of survival. We're going to talk about what you can do to protect like new plantings and existing plantings from livestock and potential wildlife impacts. And then we're going to wrap up the presentation with a talk on how to use native plants and kind of some other things to easily create wildlife habitat around your farm. So what are native plants? Native plants are plants that have specifically evolved over a very long period of time to grow in our specific growing conditions. So they are plants that have adapted for our local climate conditions, for our local soil types, for our growing season. And they're a real important part of our ecosystem because the wildlife have also come to rely on these native plants for all of their survival needs. These native plants, they don't require extra care when you go to plant them. You don't need to soil test before you plant them. You don't need to add fertilizer or special topsoil. These plants, the beauty of them is they are designed specifically for what our soil type is. So you don't really need to do anything special other than just water them the first few years. So why should you use native plants on your farm? Well, they do provide some great benefits for livestock. They provide shade and shelter from extreme weather conditions. You can really put native plants to work for you. So in the winter, they're going to offer protection from snow and rain and cold temperatures. And then in the summer, they're going to provide a shady, cool spot for livestock to rest. You can also use native plants to just minimize impacts to your neighbors by installing things like visual screens and windbreaks and hedgerows, which we will talk in more detail about. And then also native plants can be a really critical part of protecting those critical environmentally sensitive areas on your property, like waterways, streams, wetlands, and pond areas. So another benefit of native plants is that they create natural pollinator habitat. I'm sure many of you know that pollinator habitat and pollinators in general have been on the decline, and pollinators are really important for local farms. Putting some native plants in that have good flowering property and that offer a lot of pollinator habitat is really a great technique as well. We're going to be having a workshop coming up on January 5th. If you go onto our website, you will be able to sign up. If you haven't signed up for our e-newsletter, I would encourage you to do so. We will send out information on all of our webinar and educational events in our e-newsletter. But on the 5th, January 5th, we're going to be having Eric Lee Mader, who is the co-director of the Xerces Society's pollinator program, come and speak. He has done a workshop for us the last couple years. Very great speaker, offers a lot of tips on what you can do on your land to really boost up pollinator habitat. So do sign up for that if that's of interest to you. So when you're looking at your property and you're trying to figure out like where are some areas that I can easily get started for incorporating native plants, some good places to take a peek at are areas along existing drainage ditches, streams, ponds. If you have boggy areas on your property or wetlands, all of these areas, these environmentally sensitive wet areas and waterways, you need to keep your livestock out of these areas anyway. Livestock can easily damage stream banks. They can cause some water quality pollution problems if they're standing in streams. So these environmentally sensitive areas don't offer a lot of value to farming and farm operations anyway. So they're kind of a naturally good spot to look at incorporating in some native plants. Also along property lines and fences, again, like corners of pastures that may be hard to mow, to make hay or to graze, those work really well as kind of little native planting areas. And we'll talk in more detail in a few minutes about windbreaks and hedgerows, which are oftentimes installed along field edges and property boundaries. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes on waterways. So if you have a stream on your property, we do recommend that you plant conifers along the stream banks. This is really important because our local amphibians and fish need cold, clean water to thrive and survive. And so a lot of times we've found that streams that don't have any conifer components, those waterways are warm. And as those temperatures increase, especially during the summer months, you get a lot of problems with the critters that are living in those waterways, like fish and frogs. So by planting conifers, you're going to shade that area, stabilize the stream banks as the roots of those trees grow. And that's really the long-term solution to battling a couple of the noxious weeds that farmers deal with. Reed canary grass is one of those, which is a very aggressive non-native grass species that can just grow in these reeds of mats through streams and waterways. It can kind of clog and choke out the channel. It's a real destructive weed type. Also, Himalayan blackberry can grow in thickets and grow right through streams and kind of choke out waterways as well. So really the long-term solution to getting rid of those nasty, noxious weeds is to establish healthy riparian habitat, so healthy trees, conifers, to shade them out. The conifer trees also provide woody debris, which is used for habitat and a food source for fish and other wildlife living in the streams. The Conservation District manages a program called the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP for short, which actually compensates farmers for installing riparian habitat or buffers along salmon streams. The farmers receive a small rental payment on the property that they enroll in the program, but the real benefit of this program to a farmer is that they get 100% of the cost of the trees, the shrubs, all the maintenance, and the planting costs for installing these riparian buffers. So if you have a stream on your property and you're kind of wanting to improve that riparian area, improve the native plantings along the stream, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program may be a great resource for you to get plants in at no cost to you and even get a little bit of money on the side. Megan Ademeyer, who will be giving the second half of this presentation, manages that program. And so definitely follow up with Megan if you have any questions or if you're wondering if that program might work for you. Also, if you have an irrigation ditch on your property, there's usually easements or setbacks that are required along the ditch for maintenance work. So you need to follow up with your irrigation ditch company or manager to see what those setbacks are before you install a bunch of native plants in that area. If you go onto our website on our Conservation on the Farm page and scroll down, there's some resources on irrigation. And if you click on the 5 things to know before you irrigate, you'll be able to get to a list of contact information for the different irrigation ditch companies throughout the Esquimalt-Dungeness area, in case you're wondering who you should talk to. So wetlands and ponds are just a beautiful natural feature on properties anyway, but they're also a really great spot to start focusing on installing native plants. So livestock should not have access to ponds and to wetland areas. They can destroy banks very easily. Oftentimes the soils in wetlands and along ponds are very wet and damp, and so livestock can really cause a lot of soil compaction and soil damage. So these are good spots to look at improving native plants. And so you're going to want to select species that can tolerate some soil moisture, possibly some seasonal flooding. Later in the presentation, we're going to go over plants and kind of their preferred growing conditions, but there are certainly a variety of native plants that really thrive in these wet areas. We recommend using clumps of plantings. That's pretty important to nesting birds, especially waterfowl like ducks will actually lay their eggs and nest in these clumps of native vegetation along the edges of ponds and waterways. And then choosing things that provide a food source, things that eventually flower and fruit or turn into a nut, that's pretty critical too for the local wildlife that are going to be surviving in these wetland and pond areas. Another thing to keep in mind though is if you do have a man-made pond with an earthen berm or dam, you do not want to plant trees or plants that have a vigorous rooting system because those can puncture holes and really mess with the structural integrity of those earthen berms. So do avoid planting on berms. And if you've got vegetation growing on those, you need to keep a close eye, consider, discouraging vegetation growing along earthen berms. So next I want to talk about visual screens. So the idea behind visual screens is just what you would think of when I say visual screens. You want to screen out an area or maybe screen in an area. So on a visual screen, it's just typically one row of conifers. Conifers are going to provide year-round visual barrier. You can add an inner row of some flowering shrubs or some deciduous trees to add some color. But typically you want to densely plant conifers to create this visual screen. It's really useful on farms. I'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation, but oftentimes, we have messy areas on farms, or, we want to try to screen out neighbors. And so just quickly getting in a single row of conifers is a great first start for meeting those goals of screening out or screening in areas on your farm. But more often, we talk about windbreaks and hedgerows. And so the idea with the windbreak is it's designed to redirect air and wind movement. It's also going to screen views, just like a visual screen. They're often used to kind of delineate property boundaries or define property spaces within your own farm. And their windbreaks and hedgerows are pretty critical parts of wildlife habitat. Those corridors are used as travel corridors by wildlife. So oftentimes wildlife feel exposed and not safe to maybe run across an open pasture. So they will travel, using these hedgerows and windscreens. And they're also providing food and shelter for not only wildlife, but also providing some shelter for your livestock as well. Areas of our county are very windy, and we are just naturally wet anyway. And that combination of wet livestock and then wind can be very detrimental. Though we don't experience super low sub-freezing temperatures like areas of our country do, it can still be a very harsh climate once your livestock becomes saturated and then you add in wind. So, looking at adding these windbreaks can really benefit your livestock, help reduce that wind, increase temperatures during the winter months, and then also provide shade during the summer. So when you're designing these windbreaks, it's typically you're going to use a combination of conifers, deciduous trees, and shrubs. We have a really great hedgerows and windbreak handout on our website that kind of steps you through this. It also includes a table of plant species that you should consider using. Below is just a picture of kind of what one of these windbreaks would look like. So you want to have staggered rows of plantings. So typically 2 staggered rows of trees and 1 staggered row of shrubs. The 2 rows of trees should be spaced about 10 to 15 feet apart. One of those rows should be conifers, because remember, conifers are going to provide that year-round foliage, which is going to provide visual screening, shade, and also wind control during the winter months when your deciduous trees are not going to be providing as much of a benefit. And then you should include 1 row of shrubs spaced 2 to 6 feet apart. The spacing on this kind of varies depending on how quickly you want the windbreak row to function. So if you're in a big hurry, maybe consider planting them closer together so you get plants that fill in quicker. The diagram below just kind of shows you the staggered rows. The top part is kind of, if you're looking down from the top, and then you can see from a side view how that would help screen out wind and harsh conditions. So trees that are well suited for windbreaks. So for your conifers, Douglas fir, grand fir, shore pine, Sitka spruce, western red cedar, those all make great choices. These are all native conifers. There are non-native conifers like Leland Cypress that have been designed specifically for growing incredibly fast to make visual screens and windbreaks. And while the growth rate is impressive on those, they're not really providing much in the way of wildlife habitat, and it's a very kind of mono look when you use Leland Cypress. So I would encourage you, if you're going to use Leland Cypress, plan for also using native plants. Maybe take out those cypress once your native plants are mature enough that they're going to be functioning. As far as deciduous trees and shrubs, here's a list. I'll just note that the black hawthorn, it's a really neat plant, but it is thorny and very nasty. I would not use black hawthorn in an area where you need to access the area for fence maintenance, or you need to kind of get in and out of the planting. It's really nasty. That being said, it also is a great choice if you want to try to discourage livestock in an area or people in an area, then black hawthorn might be your plant of choice. So next I want to talk about hedgerows. So hedgerows are like windbreaks, but typically they're not going to include the tree component. They consist primarily or dominantly of all shrubs. And so the shrubs typically are planted 2 to 6 feet apart. Again, depending on how quickly you want to fill those in, you may, if you want a more immediate impact, I'd recommend going closer to a 2-foot spacing. If you're okay with some time passing and you pick a lot of these thicket forming shrubs, which we'll talk about next, these shrubs, you know, once they're well established after a couple years, they will grow aggressively and fill in areas. So it kind of just how close to plant the plants just really depends on how quickly you want the hedge to function more like a hedge and appear robust. So I mentioned thicket formers. These plants up here on the top left, Nook Rose, Snowberry, Thimbleberry, Salmonberry, and tall Oregon grape. These are all plants that are going to grow once they're well established. They're going to fill in voids and areas fairly quickly. So these are good choices for hedgerow species. And I'll also mention that all of those are going to form a berry or a fruit that are pretty important for local wildlife. The list below that, all of the other shrubs like red flowering currant, for example, or mock orange, these are very showy, pretty shrubs. They're going to add some interest and some color to your hedge. I'll mention ocean spray too. I really like ocean spray. It has kind of creamy clusters of whitish flowers during the spring and summer. But the real cool thing about ocean spray is those clusters of flowers dry out and turn into seeds. And those seed sources are really important for our local birds throughout the winter months. It's a natural food source. And so I like to try to incorporate ocean spray in. It grows really fast. It can be kind of shaped and pruned if you're kind of growing in an area where you want a more manicured look. So yeah, try to keep that in mind that these are going to be natural. If you're into birding, these are going to be natural attractants to birds if you include things that have a seed source. Snowberry, for example, too, those have little white berries in the winter when there's not a lot of other food, so that's a good choice as well. So on farms, you know, you can really get creative with these hedgerows and windbreaks and visual screens. Farms have messy areas like manure storage areas, feedlots, and so you can use native plants and vegetation and hedges to kind of screen these areas out. That will kind of minimize impacts to neighbors. Oftentimes farms kind of have the equipment yard where you've got old equipment that you may be using for parts. It's a little bit unsightly. And so, you know, consider those areas on your farm too, and how can you use native plants to screen those areas out? You know, farms can be dusty during the summer. We're very dry in the summer months. So things like riding arenas that have sand footing or confinement like horse pens and summer pens, those can all be very dusty. And so you, again, can use hedgerows and windbreaks to not only kind of contain dust on your farm, but also to keep it from impacting neighboring properties as well. So with that, I'm going to move over into questions. I know that's a lot of information that we covered in a very short period of time. Once I get through the questions, Megan's going to take over and we're going to kind of jump into more detailed descriptions of these native trees and shrubs. So if you've got questions about that, you know, hang tight. We're going to get to the. So I've been monitoring the chat box and I'm not seeing any questions that have been submitted. If there's anybody that would like to just ask a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. We're going to move into more details on the specific species and soil requirements and you know, more characteristics. And so feel free, you know, to kind of submit questions as we go through that section and we can get them at the end. But with that, I'll go ahead and move over to any questions that folks may have.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure, yes, please.
I started a few minutes late. Did you cover any plants that are deer resistant? Any flowers if I want to have a lot of garden flowers, cut flowers?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get a lot of questions about plants that are deer resistant. And we'll go into a little more details kind of on characteristics of some of the native plants. I will say that all of our native plants that we're going to kind of talk about, and those ones that are available for purchase as part of our native plant sale, they will be browsed on somewhat by deer, but the deer shouldn't, these plants have kind of evolved and adapted to, some occasional browsing by deer, so it shouldn't kill them. Things, like your cut flowers and a lot of the ornamentals, the deer will kind of damage and they may, definitely browse those to the point where they're not going to be sustainable. We've talked, we have tree tubes that we've used kind of that will help kind of minimize browsing. There's some different strategies, but honestly, just trying to keep the deer, a lot of times a barking dog will help kind of spook the deer out of the area. But that is somewhat of a challenge, especially for the ornamentals. And I can see if Megan, who's going to kind of give the second half of this, she may have some other ideas that she can share at the end of the presentation. But yeah, deer browsing and deer pressure is kind of an ongoing concern, but at least with the natives, it shouldn't be to the point where they're going to damage the plants and, beyond the point where they can survive. But that certainly could be a problem with like cut flowers and some ornamentals.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I wish I had better news, but
Well,
the deer definitely do like to nibble on these things too. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, is it worth putting up a 6 or 8 foot fence, or are they just going to jump it?
I have successfully put in deer fencing like on my own farm, but I have seen them even like a 6 foot woven wire fence, they can jump. If it's an area, if you're cropping or intensively growing something that you don't want the deer in, it may be worth the effort to put some deer fencing in. A lot of times it's kind of a combination. If you've got a barking dog in the deer, or they're used to you kind of push them out, they'll, they don't like that feeling of being trapped. So even if they can jump in, sometimes they panic a little bit and can't jump out, and then they'll kind of quit coming around. So that is one option. But yeah, if you're in an area where you have a lot of deer in the neighborhood and you're trying to grow something that they're gonna be interested in, fencing is probably is your best option.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? I do have one in the chat box that says, would you recommend your Beautify seed packet for native plants? And yeah, that is an option. We offer the native pollinator. We have a native pollinator packet, and then there's also those Beautify seed packets that are around. The only thing I'll say about those is, just look closely at the labels of species that are present in the seed packets to make sure that there's nothing in there. If you have livestock, that could be a potential problem with livestock. I do know that I think the Beautify packets do have lupin seed in it, and lupin can pose some toxic properties to livestock. So I would say if you're planting that, and you have livestock on your farm, you'd want to make sure that it was in an area where livestock would not be in or would not have access to. But yeah, that's a great option as well. Other questions? Okay, great. Well, with that, we're going to kind of launch into the second half of the presentation. I'll just leave a few more minutes, so feel free to speak up, or we'll get to you at the end.
All right.
Okay.
So Jennifer did a great job talking about some of the different applications. So I'm going to talk about some of the different trees and shrubs that we can use for those different applications, such as hedgerows and windbreaks. So the first thing I'm going to focus on are native trees. We have a variety of different conifer trees in our area that work wonderful for different plantings. You can see the list there, and then we have a lot of deciduous trees as well that grow great in our area. The first one we're going to talk about is Douglas fir. It's one that I'd say we probably find most commonly on farms. It grows well in most applications. It's one of our most fastest growing conifer trees, and it's very tolerant of drought. So it makes it an excellent choice for windbreaks and things like that. It's also a great one for forestry. So it's used a lot for firewood and lumber. And it grows to about 200 feet tall. So it is definitely a tall one that you want to make sure you don't put too close to structures. It really can grow in a lot of different conditions, and it does like full sun. So you wouldn't want to put this one in a very shady area, or it's not going to do very well. The second one here we're going to look at is grand fir. And this is another very tall conifer tree. And this one is tolerant of sun or shade both, but it does need a little bit more water than Doug fir does. And this is one that we do commonly find people using for Christmas trees. So that's just something else you could consider doing it on your farm, is planting some grand fir to have as a little Christmas tree plantation, as long as they're protected from animals. Some of the ones that I've seen people put in pasture type of settings in the hope that they'll be able to get some good Christmas trees end up quite damaged by animals. They do like to rub on them and nip at them. And this one, it also is fairly tolerant of different soil and moisture conditions. But again, as I mentioned, it wants a little bit more water than Douglas fir, so it isn't going to be quite as drought tolerant. Okay, so the second set of conifer trees we're going to look at are western hemlock and western red cedar. Both of these like shady conditions, so these aren't ones you're going to want to put out in a full sun type of condition, or they're not going to necessarily do very well. Western red cedar especially tends to get kind of sunburnt if you put it out in a full sun condition. And both of these do like to have some good soil organic matter and moisture. And these are both very tall trees as well. The western red cedar can be about 200 feet in height at maturity, and the western hemlock anywhere from about 150 to 180 feet. And one thing I will say about this cedar is it is very prone to damage. Deer, elk, livestock, they all like to browse on western red cedar. So it is one that you have to kind of take extra precautions to protect, or it's going to end up kind of looking like a bonsai tree and being maybe 2 to 3 feet tall for many, many years until it gets its root system established really well, because the animals will just keep browsing on it over and over. So shore pine is another great one that can deal with a variety of different conditions, full sun to partial shade. It's a shorter growing tree. It can be up to about 100 feet, but most of the time you're going to find it shorter than that, maybe 35 to 50 feet. And it is very, as you can see in this photo here, contorted. So it doesn't necessarily grow terribly straight. It oftentimes kind of has a little bit of a curvature to it, and it is a pretty plant, but it's not going to have that tall, stately look like some of the other conifers that we talked about. The other one I wanted to mention here is Sitka Spruce, and this one is a phenomenal tree if you have a lot of browse by elk and deer, and beaver as well. It's fairly resistant to all of those animals. It's very pokey. The branches are very pokey, so it lends itself well if you have animals that are trying to browse on trees. It's another taller conifer. It grows to about 200 feet as well. And this one, it grows pretty well in both full sun to partial shade, and it likes some moisture in the soil as well. So this isn't going to be a great one if you have very, very dry soils. Okay, so moving on to the deciduous trees, which are all the ones that are going to drop their leaves in the fall. We have big leaf maple, which is one of the ones that we see gorgeous fall color from. And this is a taller tree. It gets up to 100 feet tall. It likes full sun to partial shade, and it can do well in moist, even somewhat dry soils, but it does like better drained soils. It isn't going to tolerate really, really wet feet. This is one that, you know, you oftentimes see growing on older farms, very, very big, beautiful trees. It does tend to start to lose branches as they get older. So just kind of wherever you plant it, be cautious of putting it too close to structures or things that as it gets larger, it might tend to break off branches here and there. All right, so then we have vine maple down here. And this is one that we see beautiful fall color from. It's a much shorter growing deciduous tree, anywhere from 10 to 30 feet. And it grows well in full sun to partial shade and can do well in dry to even somewhat moist sites. So this one can kind of be planted in a variety of different conditions. And then over here on the bottom on the right-hand side, we have the Douglas maple, and this one also is called Rocky Mountain maple. It grows to about 30 feet tall, and whereas vine maple grows a little bit more of a multi-stemmed type of growth pattern, the Douglas maple typically will grow as more of one stem. So it's sort of like a similar to a vine maple in the size of the leaf, but it will grow more of like an upright tree. And this one gets to about 30 feet tall, and it likes full sun to partial shade and dry to somewhat moist sites. So all these will have very nice fall color to them. Oops, there we go. All right, so now we're going to move on to some of the native shrubs. This is just a big list of some of the ones that we're going to talk about. And one that I did just want to make a note of, we'll talk about it when we get to that slide as well, is black twinberry, which really likes to have more damp sites and clay or silt loam soils. So there are some of these that we will talk about that have some specific requirements that might not be an option on your farm. So red flaring currant, this is one of my absolute favorite plants. It's, I would say, our most ornamental that we suggest for native plants for people to use. It has these beautiful, beautiful pinkish red blooms that are on from about mid-March to May, and it likes full sun and well-drained soils, but it really seems to tolerate a good variety of conditions. And this one's a beautiful one to use in a hedgerow just for that gorgeous color that it has. And then we also have serviceberry over here. This is one that blooms late in the spring, and it has very nice fall color to it. And it also can grow in quite a variety of different conditions. This one's one of our taller growing shrubs. In fact, some people consider it more of a deciduous tree. It can get up to about 25 feet in height. And it is one that birds love because it has these beautiful dark purple fruits on it. And the red flaring currant, I forgot to mention, that's a great one for hummingbirds. And it also has beautiful berries on it as well that birds and things enjoy. So for serviceberry, it's going to do well in full sun to partial shade and moist to dry sites as well. And it is tolerant of drought, so it can be used in drier site conditions. Okay, so now we're going to move on to mock orange. Mock orange is another one of our ornamental plants, native plants that we have. This one has a great citrusy smell to it, so it's neat to have that addition of that beautiful smell that it has. And it likes full sun to partial shade and moist to well-drained to dry soils, and it gets to about 10 feet tall. And then over on this side, we have ocean spray. Ocean spray gets to about 15 feet tall, and it has these great little cascading white flower clusters and the seeds that persist into the winter. So this is a wonderful one for birds and things for the food source. And this one likes full sun to partial shade and does well in dry to moist sites with well-drained soil as well. Okay, so moving on, we have thimbleberry here, which many of you may have tried thimbleberry before. They're kind of an acquired taste, but they are fun to go out and pick off the plant. So this is a great one to use if you want to be able to go and harvest a little bit off your plant right from the plant and not have to cook the berries. These berries are also wonderful for birds and squirrels and chipmunks, so it's a great addition for wildlife. and it enjoys full sun to partial shade and does well in dry to wet sites. So really, it can be planted in quite a variety of places. Over here on the right-hand side, we have Nook Rose. This is one that we commonly find being used in hedgerows, as we can see here in this picture. This looks like it must be Slough and Nook Rose together. And the great thing about Nook Rose is it has these beautiful rose hips that persist into the winter. So it gives that great red color that you'll be able to see throughout the winter. And Nook Rose, it grows to about 8 feet tall. It does have some sharp spines on it, so you do have to be careful of where you plant this one, just as Jennifer mentioned earlier with the black hawthorn, of being cautious about where you plant these. And the Nook Rose does well in full sun to partial shade and fairly dry to wet sites. And it is tolerant of saturated soil, so it will grow in a good variety of different conditions. So moving on to Snowberry, as you can see up here in the top corner, this is a mixture of Snowberry and looks like Nook Rose together, and these two make wonderful hedgerows because they have this great color into the winter. The Snowberry has the white berries that will persist, and then the rose has those red hips. So this is just a beautiful one to use and great for bird food as well. So this is one that we love to see people use to be able to provide wildlife some food throughout the winter time. And this one is probably one of the shorter growing shrubs that we recommend. It only grows to about 4 feet high, sometimes can get up to about 6 feet, but normally you're going to see it at about a 4-foot height. So it's a great choice if you're trying not to block views. So moving on to red osier dogwood, this is a beautiful one for the red stems that persist throughout the wintertime. So although it'll drop its leaves just like all these other deciduous shrubs that we're talking about, it will have this beautiful red color that we see here. And this one has berries that are great for the birds. And this one will get up to about 15 feet tall. And it likes full sun to partial shade, moist, well-drained soils, and it does tolerate seasonal flooding. So this is a good one a lot of times for along stream sides or ditches, things like that, because it will tolerate those wetter soils. Now this moves us into the last two we're going to talk about, and these ones both like to have more moist soils. The twinberry over here, it blooms throughout the summer and it has beautiful black fruits that you can see down here, and it likes very moist conditions. And then the Pacific 9-bark over here has these little white flower clusters that are really beautiful, and it likes moist conditions as well. Okay, so now we're going to move into which of these species that we should be a little bit more cautious using. The wild rose, especially Nook Rose, we need to be careful when we use that because it does have quite a bit of thorns to it, and it's thicket forming. So if you plant it along a fence line, it will try to move out into pasture areas. And one thing that I have found with the rose personally is that if you have it around livestock, so for instance, white-faced cattle, I've personally had problems with them getting scratches on their eyes from the rose and then getting pink eye in that. So it is something just to be a little bit cautious about. If you have it growing out in the fields and they're trying to graze around it or trying to use it to rub on, it could scratch their eyes and then cause some eye problems. Quaking Aspen is another one, as well as Douglas spirea, that you want to use a little bit of caution when planting. Both of these are fairly invasive and can spread pretty quickly. So you just need to be careful of where you plant them so that they don't encroach into pasture areas or other areas you don't want them growing in. And then the other thing to think about when planting is which plants have toxic properties and ensuring that they're kept far away from animal areas. So bitter cherry, Gary oak, and rhododendron are kind of the top ones on our native plant list that we want to be careful about getting near any animal areas. And this spring, we will have another webinar that will be going over the poisonous plants that we have in our area. So not just trees, but it will be herbaceous plants as well. And if you sign up for our e-newsletter, which you can do on our website, you'll get information about all the upcoming webinars that we'll have this spring. Okay, so now on to native plant resources. This is a wonderful book by Pojar and McKinnon. It has so many of the plants of the Pacific Northwest coast. I don't think there's ever been a time that I've looked up a plant and haven't found it in this book. So I highly recommend this. Is a great book to be able to look things up and ID what you're looking at when you're out, walking around looking at the native plants that you might have on your property. And we also have native plant workshops throughout the year. So again, if you sign up for our e-newsletter, you'll learn about these workshops that we have. And then you can also visit our website. We have a native plant page, which if you just go to our homepage, clallamcd.org, there's a link that you can click on to be directed to the native plant page. And there's quite a variety of publications on there to learn more about these plants that we just went through. So fall is actually the best time to plant in our area. As we can see on this graph here, February and March is oftentimes the place where you can get bare root plants, for instance, like through our sale. But unfortunately, that's actually when the moisture is starting to decline. So we're putting the plants in the ground a lot of times if we do plant in the spring at a time when the moisture is going to continue to go down, which can be pretty stressful for plants. So one of the best things to do is to actually hold plants over if you get plants in the spring and heel them in an area or pot them up yourself, and then water them throughout the summer to go ahead and plant in the fall. So in October and November, when their moisture is going to start picking back up and our rainfall is going to start increasing. So when you're planting, there's a few things you need to be cautious of. You want to make sure that you get the roots down in the soil and all spread out. Some of the common things that we see happen are roots to get J-rooted. So you can see in this diagram, the hole wasn't dug deep enough, so the roots weren't able to get down deep enough. And then in this instance, the hole was too narrow, so the roots end up being very compacted and they have a harder time spreading out. Another situation is roots jam down in a hole that's wide but not deep enough. We also see air pockets happen, so make sure when you're planting and you get your plant down there in the ground that you tamp it down well to make sure there's not big air pockets like this around the roots, which can cause death for the tree. And then the other thing, you want to make sure that you plant at the proper level. So for instance, this plant is planted too shallow and the roots are still stuck out above the ground. And then this one is too deep, and then this one is mounded up just so they could kind of compensate to make sure the roots weren't sticking up too much. So all of these are things that you want to be cautious of when you're planting. And the satisfactory down here in the end, your roots aren't jammed up, they're spread out well enough. It's planted at the proper place on the tree, which if you look at the tree, you can see where the soil had been before. And that's what you really want to aim for, is having your tree or shrub at that same level where the root was when it was growing. Or I'm sorry, where the soil was when it was growing. So once you have your plant planted, you're not quite done yet. You still need to go ahead and think about protecting these plants from rodents and weed whackers. So these tree protectors that we oftentimes use on plantings we do in riparian areas don't actually protect from deer or elk browse. They're mainly to protect the plant from rodents, mice, and things that may go to the base of the tree and girdle, which is to kind of chew the way around the tree. They chew all the bark off of the plant, which can kill the plant. So these plant protectors are to prevent those rodents from doing that. They also help us find the plant if the grass gets up too high around them or the weeds, so that we can come in with weed whackers and go ahead and do maintenance around them and not damage the plant. So you can buy them from different forestry sites. There's a lot of different options on the internet, or a lot of people just use a corrugated drain pipe and cut a slit in one side so that it will protect that plant, and then they can just open it up and slide it off when that plant's large enough that the damage from rodents isn't going to be as high and there's no longer a need for weed whacking. So you also need to protect these plants from livestock. A lot of times electric fence is an excellent way to be able to keep the animals away from trees. And if you install the electric fence at about nose height, a lot of times they're going to get that zap. If it's just a single strand hot wire, they're going to get that zap on their nose, and they're not going to come back and continue to try to hit up those trees and eat them. So here's some other options of ways to protect plants if you don't have the ability to put a hot wire around them. This particular farm here used pallets just to place around the trees. This will work well, I would say, for animals that aren't going to test the strength of that, but certain things like cows might try to scratch on the side of it, or horses could certainly lean over this. So this might be a great option for sheep, maybe even goats, things like that that aren't going to be as apt to just physically shove over a structure like this. Now these cages, they work pretty well with a variety of different livestock, especially if they're secured well with a T-post or something to that effect. And that will help protect plants from the larger animals. It won't help protect them from the rodents, however. But if you are able to keep the grass, like this is in this picture, back far enough from that plant, you're going to be able to eliminate the rodent damage for the most part, because they're not going to have those areas to hide in. So where we see most of the rodent damage in on plants is in pasture settings or riparian areas that have quite a bit of cover that those animals can hide in while they're girdling plants. Whereas if you put them in a situation like this where it's pretty bare around them, the rodents aren't going to necessarily chew on those very often unless they're starving. So you also want to make sure that livestock don't chew on bark of mature trees as well. There's a lot of animals that will go out and they'll just chew the bark all around the tree. And once it gets around a significant portion of that tree is going to die, because the bark is what's taking the nutrients and water and things like that up for the plant into a lot of the plant. And so by not having that bark, you're going to end up damaging that tree in the long run. And so the general recommendation is to also protect the drip zone around plants so that you're not damaging the root zone. Compaction of those roots over time will lead to eventual death of the plant over a long term. And if you leave these trees unpruned, this will really help discourage livestock to get under there for the most part. So you can see with this tree, this Western Red Cedar, that the branches are down here and the animals aren't going to be as apt to be able to get in there since the branches are so low. So that is one technique you can use to help. But again, the best thing to do is just to make sure that your animals are fenced away from your plants, even the mature ones, so that you protect them. So the other thing with planting native plants is to make sure you plan for fence maintenance. So you're going to want to figure out the distance that your mature plant will need to be away from the fence in order to not interfere with it. You're going to want to also allow enough space for a mower if you're planning on using a mower to maintain between the fence and the planting, and give yourself a good width there to be able to do that maintenance. And then also, especially with electric wires, make sure that you prune any plants back so that they're not touching those electric wires to short them out. The other thing to consider is what type of species that you put next to fences. So for instance, if you put large conifer trees or larger deciduous trees right along a fence line, over time when those get older, they might start to drop branches off, which could break your fences or fall on top of your fences. So consider that when you are doing your plantings. And some fences are definitely easier to maintain than others if they have branches fall on them. So for instance, barbed or barbless wire might be a little bit easier to fix if a branch falls on it versus woven wire, which can oftentimes get crushed down, and it's a lot harder to fix that woven wire if it's damaged by falling debris. All right, so now we are just gonna focus a little bit on some tips for encouraging wildlife to your property. So one of the first things around this time of year that we can really do to help pollinators and other invertebrates is to leave the leaves. So instead of going out and raking up all the leaves and taking them and putting them in a big pile or chipping them all up with a lawnmower, it's actually really great to leave the layer, especially if it's a thin layer, because it won't damage pastures, but yet it'll give all these pollinators and other bugs some really great winter cover. So if you do choose to rake up the leaves, oh, my apologies, let me back up one. If you do choose to rake up the leaves, it is good to keep them in piles to avoid damaging the live insects or eggs. So as I mentioned, you're not going to want to chip them up because that could damage a lot of the insects and egg masses that could be on those leaves. And then it is really wonderful to use this as mulch that you can use around your plants. So rather than having to go out and buy expensive wood chips or things of that nature, using these leaves that you already have at your disposal, you can put them around the plants to provide mulch that'll help keep in moisture come summertime. And just that way it saves you from having to have a big leaf pile somewhere as well. So another great wildlife tip is to leave snags on your property. So if you already have some dead trees that aren't going to be a problem for any hazard for buildings or fence lines, leaving these for habitat for a variety of beneficial insects and cavity nesting birds is just a wonderful idea. They also make great perches for birds such as hawks and eagles. So they can really help bring a variety of wildlife to your property. And these are also a great place to put nesting boxes on, as you can see in this photo. And if you don't already have snags in your property, you can easily create them as well. So you can see this, they actually just took this tree and they cut the branches off of it and left some of these larger branches at the top sticking out to provide perches and things. So if you have a tree that's dead, rather than completely take it out, you might consider creating a snag out of it. And then as we're cleaning up from windstorms this year, it's great to take these branches and things, all this brush, and instead of burning it or chipping it up, if you have a place on your property that you can pile the brush up, it creates wonderful cover for small wildlife, chipmunks, squirrels, things of that nature. And the branches, they do best if they can be consolidated into kind of a dense looking teepee around stumps or other logs, just to provide more habitat for more animals. And it's best if you can crisscross the layers of different sized material to kind of help give a variety of areas, a variety of habitat in there, and also raising it up off the ground just a little bit. So if you can even get some rocks or larger material on the bottom, that's going to help this pile remain in place for a long time. Because ideally, you don't want to disturb it, as you know, the animals are going to come in and use this habitat. So it isn't something that you're going to want to rebuild or redo every year, other than just to add to it. And then finally, just a quick look at bat houses. Bats are just a great species to bring to farms, since they can eat so many mosquitoes in a night. So it really helps with our animals if we can encourage more bats to come to our farms. And you can either buy or build bat houses. There's a variety of different plans that you can find on the internet. But one thing that is good to do, and this one is not done this way, but it is good to actually paint them a black color and put them in full sun so that that warmth from the sun can give the bats a little bit warmer of a house there to nest in. And you want to put them about 12 to 15 feet off the ground. It's about what they find most comfortable to live in. And then this one actually has a guard here to keep cats and things from climbing up the pole. So that's another good thing to think about when you're hanging these bat houses, is how to protect them from any animals that might try to damage them.
So the last thing we want to share before we wrap this up is on where you can find native plants. So there's several different options. Local nurseries, they usually are going to sell potted stock, and often these are going to be larger, more mature plants that are a little bit more expensive, but sometimes can do really great. If you're just looking to establish some plants quickly, then definitely check out local nurseries. Another thing you can do is collect and propagate from local sources. So for instance, willow trees, red osier dogwood, there's a variety of different native shrubs, especially that you can take cuttings from the mature plants, and then you can go ahead and put those cuttings in the ground as long as it's kind of wet enough, and those will grow. We do have a good book in our office that we could loan you to look at that talks about taking cuttings from different plants. And then another thing you can do is just transplanting seedlings. A lot of times, you know, there's areas where seeds have just kind of gone wild and grown all over the place. You know, a lot of like Western hemlock, for instance, really self-seeds quite a bit. So even just carefully uprooting those seedlings and transplanting them is another great way to get some native plants going. And then the Conservation District, we also have a plant sale, an annual plant sale that we've referred to a few times during the presentation. And these plants are bare root restoration grade plants. So what that means is these plants are pulled from the ground when they're dormant, which is typically starting about now in December. And they are pulled out of the ground, and most of the soil is kind of shaken off the roots, and they're all bundled up. And then we have the plant sale, which I'll talk about in just a second, that we distribute these plants. And typically they're sold in bundles of 10s, 25s, and 50s. So they're a little larger quantity, but they are great quality plants, and they are quite a bit cheaper than what you can get potted stock for. And they do actually grow quite quickly. The great thing about the bare root plants is that they aren't root bound like you get sometimes with potted stock. So you put those bare root plants in the ground, and typically they're just going to take off and kind of hit the ground going. So a lot of the restoration projects that we do, we may see 2 to 3 feet of growth in some of the shrubs that we plant out there. And a lot of times in our conifers, if they're in some really wet areas, we may even see 1 to 2 feet of growth in those. So it's a great way to get a lot of native plants at a low cost. So to order through our native plant sale, you can order online. It's on our website, clallamcd.org/native-plants. And all these plants are sold on a first come, first served basis. So currently we are out of shore pine already. So if you are interested in placing an order, I'd highly recommend getting that order in quickly. And if you do need some assistance in choosing species, feel free to reach out to Jennifer and I. We're happy to try to go through what might be a good match for your farm and how many you might need of those different species. So we're happy to help with that kind of thing. This year, we are accepting orders through January 23rd of 2022. So we're not really that far into our plant sale and already being sold out of shore pine. We've had a lot of orders placed. So like I said, I would place an order soon if you're looking to order some. And these plants are all ready for pickup the first week of March. So we do this pre-sale to make sure that the nursery we get them from doesn't, sell out of everything that we know our customers want. And then they ship them to us the end of February. We package them all up and have them ready for you the first week in March. And there's different dates that you can pick them up that you can select at checkout. All right, so if you do want to get some help from the Conservation District, we are happy to do so. Our services are free of charge, and we routinely make farm visits. So we'd love to get out in the field and come out to your farm and just go over some different things that you can do out there based on your objectives and, you know, based on your goals and kind of what we have seen over the years that, you know, could help your farm if you'd like to do them. So you can email us or you can call us. And you can also visit our website, and on our website, we have a farm planning page that has some more publications just specifically related to farming. And you can actually request assistance right on there as well. There's a little button that says that you can push to request help from us. So with that, that's kind of the end of our presentation. We'll open it back up to questions. And it looks like we have a couple here. Let's see. Okay, so Fred Sharp said he's giving a Zoom talk on December 11th, and it's on rain shadow, prairie ecology, and conservation. And yes, that would be great, Fred, if you would like to post. Yes, you did. Perfect. So Fred has posted a flyer on here on the chat log. If anybody is interested in learning more about the rain shadow, prairie ecology, and conservation Zoom talk that he's giving, that sounds really great. Thank you so much, Fred, for posting that. And then Marlene has said that it was suggested that they put down native clover in their backfield. Where do we obtain this? Gosh, native clover. I would probably look at a website called Northwest Meadowscapes to see if they had any native clover. I'm not sure. That's the best source that I know of for local native plants, native grasses, native flowers. We actually order our pollinator seed packet from Northwest Meadowscapes. And so I think that would be where I would check first. If they don't have the native clover, I would recommend you contact them and find out if they know where you could get that. And it may be that there might be some other really great options that if they don't have the native clover, that they might suggest to you. And again, if you do get anything like that, any native forbs or things like that, just if you have them with livestock, be sure that they don't have the seeds in there that could be toxic to livestock. Oh, thank you. Jennifer just posted their information. If you just Google Northwest Meadowscapes, it will come up. And yes, thank you. So actually, our seminar is, we have a recording of that. It was from last year that we did that, the pollinator, oh, I forget what we call it, pollinator workshop, and it's on our website. If you go to our website and look at our workshops page, we have a past workshops link that you can go to, and we have a variety of different workshops that we've held over the past couple of years. Ever since COVID hit, we started doing these webinars, and we've been trying to post everything that we can. So we have the pollinator species webinar on there, and we have some excellent ones that Department of Natural Resources helped us do last spring that talk a little bit about trees selection and species, protecting trees from wildlife damage, just a whole bunch of things like that. So I'd highly recommend checking out our past workshop selection on our website. Okay, did anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute if you do. And if not, oh, looks like somebody's unmuting here.
I do have a question about pasture management. I have a horse pasture and very muddy pasture. Is there any native cover crops that grow quickly in the mud to mitigate that problem?
Yeah, generally what we would recommend to kind of for a quick grower, it's not going to be native, but annual ryegrass grows very well as kind of a quick cover, and it would be able to handle animals. You know, it's going to need that time to be able to grow, but it would be able to kind of handle the trampling and that kind of thing once you do let horses back in there. And it is safe for grazing, so it would be fine for that. But we'd also love to chat with you. If you want to get in touch with us after the workshop, we have some great publications that we could show you that kind of have some different species for grass species that you could put down. A lot of the forb species, you know, clovers and things, they're just not going to handle the livestock, horse and livestock movement.
Rich also.
So what was that?
that would be too rich for my species of horse anyway.
Yeah,
easy to-
absolutely. Yeah. So, you know what? We have your email address, Lynn. We'll email
Okay.
you the publication that we're talking about, and we're happy to come out and do a site visit as well if you wanted to kind of have us look at it and see what we might recommend. We're both
that.
horse owners, so we know how it can be a little challenging in those high use areas.
Yeah, I would love that. Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lynn. We'll drop you an email then.
Okay,
right.
thank you so much.
Yep. Is there anybody else that wanted to do any questions? And again, you're welcome to just contact us. Jennifer put in the chat box the link to our past webinars. So I'd highly recommend looking at those. There's just some really great resources that we've been able to have help us with webinars, and some that we've done personally as well in there. So.
Do you have any webinars in there about doing raised beds, to grow vegetables and stuff like that in the coming spring, summer months?
Yeah, unfortunately we don't, but I'm going to see if I can find the link to WC Clallam County Extension Master Gardeners. And if I can't, then I can always email it to you as well. But they had, Master Gardeners does some really excellent brown bag series webinars is what they call them. And they've done some great topics. So just right now, I'm not seeing those. They have like a past webinar section on their website that I was looking for.
Okay.
So I'll see if I can find that and then email you the website. Yeah, because I'm not seeing it right offhand. I was looking for it, but don't see it right offhand. So, oh wait, Jennifer, did you find it then? She might have found it. She might have been able to post it.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I posted a link to their kind of upcoming webinars, but on their website, they do have a series of, kind of guides that can help with the raised garden. But I would say Master Gardeners are your best bet.
And then,
I'm so sorry.
I know that.
Oh, I was just gonna say I found it and I posted it. So it's up there now. The one that I'm talking about that goes to like the whole big link of their Green Thumb education series. So they probably will have something in there on raised beds. No guarantees, but probably.
Okay, that's great. And then my last question was, I know you talked a lot about, wind and screening and stuff like that. What about noise? Do you think it's better to plant, conifers and other deciduous trees like in, kind of layered for noise, or is it better to put up a wood fence? What's going to absorb noise more?
Conifer trees are going to do an excellent job of absorbing the noise because they're going to have, foliage year round. Like deciduous trees, they'll drop the leaves and stuff, so they won't give you that good year round buffering. But a layered effect is ideal. Like if you could do a row of conifers and then a row of deciduous, that really just kind of gives that good like diversity and just kind of like depth to it. So I would, for sound, I would take conifer trees over a fence any day because they also are going to grow a lot taller than your fence would be able to be. So
okay, that's great to hear. That's what I was planning on doing, but I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, all the times that I've been on places that are near the highway, you get that good screen of conifers. I mean, it's going to take a little while for them to grow up, but if you get especially that kind of staggered line, maybe even a two rows staggered, it just, oh my gosh, it makes a huge difference for the sound.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, with all the building going on in Squam, you're going to need it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, the only tricky thing is, just kind of be aware of how tall these are going to get. I have seen Douglas fir topped, to kind of keep them at a certain height, and it does work. It can just kind of weaken the tree. It doesn't work as well on something like Western red cedar. Western red cedar does a lot better, it seems like, being topped than something like a Doug fir tree. But it has been done, and I've seen it been, done successfully. So if you do need to keep them at a certain height, again, I'd still go towards conifers. I think they'd be great choice.
Okay, great. Thank you. What was your name again? I didn't catch it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Megan Ademeyer, and then my coworker's Jennifer Bond, and we both essentially do very similar things. We're both conservation planners and do habitat restoration, and we're a really small office. We only have 4 of us in our office, so we're all here to help as much as folks need it. So
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you for attending.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, with that, unless anybody has any other questions, we'll stick around for just a minute in case anybody is still trying to get these links opened up on their computer and whatnot. And then if anybody does miss out and doesn't get a chance to get these links, just email us and we can go ahead and send them back out to you. But we'll stick around for a few more minutes. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We really enjoy doing this and we enjoy the participation, and we're happy to help if anybody needs it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having you come to my farm. I think I have too many questions and, you know, too much that it would be eyes on to see where and what. I do need wind screens and I need some privacy screens and I need some pasture management. So I definitely need a visit. So we'll have to schedule something. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lynn. I'll actually go ahead and drop you an email right now while we're in this little kind of waiting period.
Okay. All right. Great.
All right, thanks.
Great. Yeah, I actually don't even have Wi-Fi. I'm at the library right now watching this. So.
Oh no! Oh shoot! Well, can you get email? Okay. Well, yeah.
Oh yeah, I can
right
get
now,
email
okay.
on my cell phone and stuff. I just don't have I can't get Zoom without a Wi-Fi.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your dedication to going to the library. to
Yeah.
watch
Yeah.
this.
Well, this is stuff I really need. So.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.